video, Caleb. And thank you for that. Thank you for that kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about the state of conservatism, especially to such an audience like this. I've been a great fan of everything that API does, and I know that there's an army of people, supporters, donors, people that are praying for it, and I see that as the people in this room. So, on behalf of the people in the movement, we owe you all a great debt of gratitude, and I'm so happy to be here with you. I hope to save a few minutes at the end for any comments or questions or thoughts that you may have of me, anything I might say that you disagree with. I would love to hear from you. In that case, you get to go first. Or any ideas you have for Yellowhammer News, things that you might like to see us cover. But before any group can have a conversation about a topic, they should at least agree on the definition, I think. But if I were to ask everyone in this room for their definition of conservatism, no two would be identical. That's because conservatism as a word doesn't fully describe the many aspects of our political philosophy. Some of its principles, like the principle of variety, and some of its processes, like the free market, aren't conservative at all, just like modern liberalism isn't very liberal. Conservatism is complex, and it is full of contradictions, so much so that when William F. Buckley was asked, you would think that would be the person to ask. Well, they asked him to define conservatism, and he wrote an essay titled Notes Toward an Empirical Definition of Conservatism, reluctantly and apologetically given by William F. Buckley. So if William F. Buckley couldn't define conservatism, then nobody can, but others have tried. This from Abraham Lincoln. What is conservatism? Is it not adherence to the old and tried against the new and untried? Yes, but as I mentioned a moment ago, conservatism also favors variety, preferring creativity to centralization. And there's nothing old and tried about what happens in a vibrant free market. And back to Buckley for a moment. He wrote that conservatives believe that millenniums of intellection have served an objective purpose. Certain problems have been disposed of. Certain questions are closed. So in other words, conservatives believe if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's true as well, but conservatism isn't stagnant either. This from Russell Kirk. The thinking conservative understands that permanence and change must be recognized and reconciled in a vibrant society. Once upon a time, the traditions that we hold sacred right now were new, often untried and radical ideas themselves. So it stands to reason that there are still undiscovered ideas that in time, if tested and applied, will become traditions valued by generations yet to come. So, the standard definition that conservatives don't like change doesn't work either. Most modern conservatives would likely define conservatism by a lot of the ideas that we talk about. Both the broad, things like limited government, free markets, and strong families, and the very narrow, like overturning Roe v. Wade, defending the Second Amendment, or balancing the budget. So, President Trump, he's no movement conservative, as most people know, but he actually gave a pretty good answer when he was asked to define a conservative a couple of years ago. He said, well, I think it's a person who doesn't like to take risks. That's true. But going back to Russell Kirk, he wrote, conservatives are guided by their principle of prudence. A fundamental component of prudence is avoiding risk. But then again, isn't risk a fundamental component of capitalism? So another contradiction in the way that we think. So now that we have established that we cannot successfully define this term, let's ask, what's the state of this undefinable term in the United States and in the state of Alabama? Well, if you believed everything you read in the mainstream media, you would believe that conservatism is dead in the ditch and progressivism is on the march. The morning after Senator Doug Jones was elected, AL.com's editorial board declared that the voice of justice had spoken for a burning movement of black voters, LGBT activists, women, and young voters who represent the future of our state. You see, in their world, the progressive agenda had finally penetrated the heart of Dixie. They went on, Doug Jones' election is a moment of change, not only in Alabama, but for an America yearning for signs that these values matter. Now, we know that's not what happened. But this style of fiction coming from the liberal media is nothing new. We're not hearing about it so much right now, but let's remember what they were saying about the conservative movement a year ago this month. You know, President Trump had been in office for a few weeks. Some of his cabinet appointments were pretty good. Mattis, Kelly, our own Jeff Sessions. But we didn't know anything about our new Treasury Secretary other than he donated millions of dollars to Democrat candidates. And then we had Steve Bannon running around talking about a $1 trillion stimulus boondoggle and saying populism, populism, populism everywhere. We didn't know what to think. The American Thinker declared rest in peace movement conservatism. And a year ago, the website Truthout carried a post titled How Donald Trump Killed Movement Conservatism. And of course, the Washington Post responded by saying Trump's takeover of conservatism is complete. This continued throughout the year despite the growing body of evidence showing conservatism is not only being implemented, but with great effect. These types of eulogies for our movement are nothing new though. Similar headlines ran when Goldwater lost in '64, when Reagan lost his primary fight in '76, in 1992 when I first started to vote, and in 2006. So 5 years ago, Reuters asked, is conservatism going extinct? And in 2008, the New Republic happily confirmed that yes, conservatism is dead. Ding dong, the liberals cheered, and then they went on to lose 1,000 elected offices across the country during the next 8 years. So who won those seats? For the most part, conservatives. So the truth is, no matter what you read in the mainstream media, our movement was far from dead in 1964, and it is far from dead right now. So let's take a look at Alabama. When the Alabama Policy Institute was founded in the late 80s, Democrats controlled all but one of our statewide national offices. And you really can't count Governor Guy Hunt winning because that was a fluke, as we all know. Both of our U.S. senators were members of the Democratic Party. 5 of our 7 U.S. House members were Democrats. And our state legislature was 86% Democrat. Today, 6 of the 7 U.S. House seats are held by Republicans. Both of our senators were Republicans until that fiasco last year, and we're going to correct that in a couple of years, no doubt. The Republicans hold every statewide constitutional office in Montgomery, and the state legislature is now 70% Republican. And although some of that could be attributed to switching brands, you have a moderate, a conservative Democrat becoming a moderate Republican, but there has been some undeniable seismic changes in policy. You know, when Republicans took control a few years ago in the State House, they began trimming the government, cutting waste, rolling back some regulations, making some hard choices, balancing some priorities. And now, this year, we're seeing the result of some of that. Major businesses are relocating to Alabama, near record unemployment, tax cuts, defending the unborn, vouchers for kids stuck in failing schools, and other conservative reforms. And we all know Alabama is a conservative state, overwhelmingly so, ranked 5th most conservative according to Gallup. Republican candidates enjoy a 30-point advantage in the state of Alabama. And we're also very pro-life. 60% of our citizens believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. But it's not just the social issues either. Consider this from a poll commissioned by you guys, the Alabama Policy Institute. 64% of those surveyed would be more likely to vote for a candidate that campaigned on reducing or rejecting federal dollars in order to limit the federal government's influence over Alabama. That's a strong conservative voice there. So that's Alabama. Let's take a look nationwide real quick. A survey from Gallup found the United States is overwhelmingly conservative as well, with conservatives outnumbering liberals in 44 states. tied in just 2, and lagging in only 4. You could walk from the Florida Keys to northern Minnesota without touching a blue county. And President Trump, who did not campaign as a movement conservative, has governed as a movement conservative, at least partially. Think about some of the things he's done. He's rolled back some harmful regulations. He's cut taxes. He's opened up areas for oil and gas exploration. He got us out of the Paris Climate Accord. He's moving our embassy to Jerusalem. Could be seen as symbolic, but I think it is a very symbolic act that sends a message to the region. And he's challenging the Democrats and many Republicans on illegal immigration. And the experts say his judicial appointments have been conservative as well. There's not a lot of data showing that yet, but we will have that in just a few weeks. Going back to Trump, one website that assigns an ideological score on politicians found that in 2006, President Trump took the conservative position about 42% of the time. By this month, that has gone up to 60%. And like many of you, 60% where I come from is a failing grade. But when you consider that President Reagan was only 1 point ahead of Trump in this same poll, even the most ardent never-Trumper has to concede that at least this White House is on the right track as far as conservatism. So it was premature, like those headlines said, to have pronounced conservatism dead because the Republican Party nominated Donald Trump. And if you think about it, it's interesting to note that he did not run as a movement conservative, but he's been governing as a movement conservative. That ought to tell you something about the strength of our movement. It doesn't depend on a single individual, that we have such a strong group of people and we own some of these ideas that even if you're not a movement conservative, once you get into office, you can be propelled, you can be taken in by these things. So I think that speaks very well of our movement. And in the state, it's downright silly to think that progressivism is on the march because Doug Jones won. You have to look at the extraordinary circumstances in both of those elections. Look at the evidence and draw an honest conclusion. And when you do, you'll see that conservatism remains very popular across the entire United States, not only in Alabama. So meanwhile, our opposition remains disoriented and in denial. They stagger from one angry group to another, further alienating a majority of Americans. But is all truly well and good? I would say no. We have many, many challenges, but in the interest of time, I'll just mention, I'll get to 4. So first, rolling off the headlines today, consider the debt. Last week we learned that the federal government has to borrow more than $1 trillion this year. That's twice as much as it borrowed in the last fiscal year. We cut taxes and conservatives cheered. We didn't cut spending, and conservatives were largely silent. Not only were they silent, they went on to pass an increase in spending. I think it bodes well for Alabama that we had 2 of our members vote against that spending bill. Representative Mo Brooks and, of course, Representative Gary Palmer. There were tough votes for them, but I was proud to see them take it. But cutting taxes is good. Not cutting spending, increasing spending, as you all know, is not consistent, is not conservative, and it's not sustainable. The second challenge I'd like to talk about is our most treasured rights, freedom of speech and the freedom of religion. We are quickly becoming a nation of censors on one hand and on the other, snowflakes. Americans now need to worry less about the government abridging their freedom of speech or the government abridging their freedom of religion than they need to seriously worry about the Twitter mob having them fired from their job for their beliefs or in a way they might express themselves. A lady rides a bike down the road in Northern Virginia. She's President Trump's motorcade passed by. She gives the middle finger salute. She loses her job because of it. A founder of a tech company is blacklisted because he donates a relatively small amount of money to a group that's supporting traditional marriage. Every week brings new examples of people saying something, believing something, and at generating penalties that were once reserved for actions that actually broke the law. And these penalties may be imposed by the private sector rather than the government, but they have the same impact on somebody's life. More importantly, they have the same ability to chill speech or to bully somebody into the closet because of what they believe. At least with government censorship or government persecution, a citizen has due process. A citizen can rely upon their rights. Not so with the Twitter mob. If you think incorrectly, if you speak incorrectly, the Twitter mob will come after you. You will be punished for your thought crime. You know, and every year George Orwell looks less a writer and more a prophet because of that. Third, consider the division within our movement. Just as it is impossible to define conservatism, it is impractical to expect everybody to be the same type of conservative. It's not even conservative to think that way. It's the other side that thinks that way. They're the ones who cannot tolerate true diversity, not us. And we need everyone. We need a big tent, politically speaking, to get our ideas across. But if we were to look at the Mitch McConnells of the world and say, no, we cannot have them, they got to go out. And if we look at the Steve Bannons of the world and say, no, we cannot have them, they got to go out. If we look at the Never Trumpers and say, they got to go out, or the Forever Trumpers and say, they're not true conservatives, they can't be in here. If we look at the supporters of Mitt Romney and say, we're going to push them out. If we look at the supporters of Roy Moore and say, we can't tolerate those guys. If we look at the libertarians in our movement that support Ron Paul and say, we can't have them either, then the winner of that fight is going to be left with about 10% of the electorate. And what does that get us? Where does that get our ideas? In a parliamentary form of government, that might get you a minister or two. In the United States, it gets you nothing. But if you go too far in the other direction with unity, it becomes tribalism. So again, a contradiction that we conservatives have to work through. The fourth challenge we should all be aware of is what I think is the cause of that division, and that's a misunderstanding of conservatism. You know, for decades we built a movement based off of organic American conservatism, sort of common sense that told us our beliefs and what we were doing, the way we lived was the right way. Many of us are what I call cradle conservatives. To us, these values, these principles, they're less of a political philosophy and more of a way of life that was passed down to us from our parents and our grandparents. You know, sure, behind the scenes there were deep thinkers and there were institutions creating, an intellectual framework of conservatism to make sense of it all. But our parents didn't have to read Kirk to value traditions or read Hayek to understand that you distrust promises made in some faraway capital. You know, fair enough, that worked well for a while. I don't think it works anymore. Now our unprecedented ability to share information, and form even smaller networks of believers has atomized our movement. Many conservatives now see their beliefs in the fleeting individual policies that they personally support, not the principles underneath those policies that they share with so many other people. And because of these factions and a misunderstanding of our shared principles, where we should be seeing allies, many of us are seeing enemies. We must counter this problem, and we can do so by taking the conversation straight to the people, right down to the grassroots. Instead of talking about a vote, instead of talking about the complexities of a policy that we in this room may have many beliefs upon, we should first speak about the principles. That is how we can keep our movement together and keep us from moving too far off the path. Still, for some, they say it's pointless to talk about principles or philosophy. Stick to the bread and butter issue. Focus on the issues. One friend of mine in the conservative media told me during the last presidential primary, when I was in the throes of figuring out who to vote for, he said, this isn't about conservative versus liberal. And I really respect this man, and we're on the same side politically, but it stopped me because I thought it has always been about that. It's always been about the struggle between the people who believe in the perfectibility of man through plans and controls, and then us, the people who believe in the prosperity of man through liberty and order. We've been having that fight under one label or another since antiquity. And like the devil, its impact doesn't depend upon whether anyone believes it is happening or not. You know, the Democrats, the liberals, the progressives, they know this. They're teaching it all the time, what they think, how they think, why they think. They have goals, they have objectives. To them, theirs is a political movement with a clear trajectory and a destination. So we would be fools to rest upon all of the successes that I mentioned a moment ago. They were gained over centuries, but they can be lost in a single generation if we fail to pass along the way we think. We must teach conservatism early and often, because from the conservative perspective, not only our future, but our present and even our past depend upon our ability to do so. So with that, I'll say thank you, and if anybody has any comments or questions or thoughts about the conservative media in the state, such as it is growing, I would love to hear them. I would love to take them back to our team. There could be a case, if one wants to make it for an increase in revenue. Conservatives can support that under certain circumstances, I believe. But there are bills in the state legislature right now that would allow for such a thing that are conservative. I'll give you one as an example. Senator Arthur Orr represents the Decatur area. He has a bill in the legislature right now that would allow counties to impose, I believe, up to a 5-cent tax for a period of 5 years for very specific road projects. And it would allow each county commission to turn that over as a referendum to the people to decide if they want to increase their gas tax by 5 cents for 5 years to fund project A, B, C, and D. That is actually a very conservative bill, because one of the principles of conservatism is the notion of subsidiarity, which says that the more decisions that you can push down to the local area, the better. In Alabama, through our Constitution and a lot of the habits that we have, we consolidate a lot of the power in Montgomery, where we don't let counties have those decisions. I think that is not a conservative way to govern. We have counties for a reason. We have county commissions for a reason. I'm never going. There might be a Geneva County. Okay, I might never drive on the roads in Geneva County. What do I care if they want to raise their gas tax by 5 cents to fund some bridge or road project? It's up to them. And if it doesn't work out, it's on them. Doesn't bother me. But the notion I'd like to get to is that is a conservative bill, because it focuses on the principle of subsidiarity, which says, you know, an individual should handle the problems that he can take care of. If he can't take care of them, then it goes to the family. If the family can't take care of them, then to the community, then to the state, county, and to the county, to the state, and to the federal government. That's how it should flow. That's not how we have it stacked up right now. But you know, I'd like to see that bill passed. If the referendum came to my county in Madison, I'd vote against it, because I don't think we need it. But who am I to tell somebody in another county that they can't raise their gas tax by 5 cents? There could be an argument made for that, but when you look at what was done with the Alabama Accountability Act, I don't see that getting through a Democrat or a liberal majority in the state legislature. That's a conservative piece of legislation. It's a start. I would like to see it grow, but I don't think a liberal state legislature would have passed that bill. They wouldn't have done it 15 years ago when they were in charge. So that gets back to what I was saying earlier. You know, there are different shades of conservatism, and if we want to have political power, if we want to be able to enact our values and our principles and change things, we have to have a coalition. But if we can at least unite behind some of the principles that bring us together, then we can get in power and we can get chairmanships of committees, which is very important, and then we can start to actually implement change. But if we insist upon, a certain strident definition, if we were to insist upon only conservatives like myself, and I am a deep red conservative, like I said, there would probably be about 15% of me in the country, and that's just not enough. We got to get in power. Well, one of the definitions, my working definition of conservatism, is an acceptance of that which works and a rejection of that which doesn't, despite your own personal policy preferences. Conservatives look at things and they say, okay, I might not like how the world is, but this is how it is. I might not like that this works, but it works. And that could be some of it. But progressives and liberals, they don't believe in what they believe because they have a sinister outlook on the world. They think that their ideas would work if you just gave it more funding and more time. Every failed liberal idea that's ever been, they said, we just didn't have enough time, we just didn't have enough money. It would have worked. So they believe it'll work. I wrote a lot of articles during the primary for AL.com lamenting the fact that Donald Trump was cleaning up in the primaries. I had to be hauled kicking and screaming into his camp. I was not a fan. I was not a fan of a lot of things he said. When he said that Planned Parenthood does, quote, great things, my head almost exploded. But he took the abortion mandate out of Obamacare. He removed the penalty for states that want to defund Planned Parenthood. His Justice Department is investigating Planned Parenthood. The experts tell me that the justice and the judges that he appointed are likely to defend the sanctity of life. He sent the vice president to speak at the March for Life. Oddly enough, something that no vice president or president has ever done, which I don't see why that is the case. I would like to see President Trump there next year, along with Vice President Pence. So, Pastor Reeder said it a couple of weeks ago. He said, you have to admit, there hasn't been a president in recent memory that has done more for the pro-life movement than Donald Trump. If you would have told me that 2 years ago, I'd have said, that's no way, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. But he gets in, he's given the authority, something happens. Maybe the gravity of the office, maybe the people that he has around him. Like what you were saying, he's listening to all sides and he's saying, well, this just makes a lot of sense. Maybe from his business world, he looks back and he said, I had a lot of people on failed businesses that told me the same thing. They needed more time and more money, but sometimes you just got to cut it. Maybe he takes that attitude. Maybe he likes to counterpunch so much that we're actually benefiting from the liberals in the media because they're expressing a certain point of view and they're hitting him at it. So he just wants to hit them back as hard as he can. So he picks up the nearest blunt object that they don't want to be hit with. What is it? It's conservatism. I'm happy with it however it happens. Now, would I wish he would put down the Twitter? Do I wish he would say say different things or sometimes not say anything at all? Yeah. But, the advancement on pro-life issues is just something that we should embrace and celebrate. And that's conservative. He is going against, everybody in D.C., they're against that idea. Even the great Republicans that we send up there, they get kind of squishy on it once they get in the cocktail party circuit. He's acting different. The tax cut was good. Spending increases, terrible. The moving our embassy to Jerusalem, when the rest of the world told him not to, again, he might just be like, okay, the rest of the world's telling me not to do this. Bam. I'll take it. Integrity is something that I'm looking for the most. I think we have 4 candidates that we can be truly proud of. I don't look at them as embarrassments. 5, I guess now. I guess I need to be updated. I don't think we should be embarrassed of 5 candidates. They're all good candidates. I'm going to be looking for integrity. I'm going to be looking for someone who's not only talking the right message about economic activity, but talking the right message about social issues. Our governor is not just a CEO of a company. They're the leader of a state full of people who share a culture. So I'm going to be asking our candidates the economic development questions, but I'm also going to be asking them evidence and indicators of where they will stand with certain social issues, with free speech issues, with freedom of religion issues, with the life issues. We have 4 abortion clinics in this state. I don't think we should have any. We have some means at our disposal to start pushing back at those. If many of y'all aren't from Huntsville, I know, but the abortion clinic in Huntsville was just moved last year. It is across the street from an elementary school. Actually across the street from an elementary school, a large elementary school. So we're sending our kids into the school right here, and we're killing them right here, right on the other side. You know, the Huntsville City Zoning Board allowed that to happen. They said, well, you know, the courts are going to rule against us, so we're just going to go ahead and allow them to do it. That's not what we want. That's not why Trump was elected. We want people to push back against that, to fight for every inch. If we can delay them for a year, delay them for a year. Don't just fall back and say, well, you know, they're going to beat us in court. Take them to court. Fight. That's what we want. So personally, that's what I'm going to be looking in our next go. Thank y'all very much. Caleb.